All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we are tackling someone whose life story is like, well, straight out of a political thriller.
Oh, yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest serving prime minister.
Wow.
You sent over this YouTube video from Novolectio. It's called Chi è Benjamin Netanyahu, la storia del primo ministro più duraturo di Israele.
Okay.
And it is just packed with details about his journey, his ideology, and like how he shaped the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So should we just dive right in?
Let's dive in. Yeah. It's actually amazing how much his personal history is just like intertwined with Israel's history. I mean, born in 49, right? Just a year after the nation was founded.
Wow.
And growing up during this intense period of, nation building, but also conflict.
Yeah, and I mean his military service, you can't really overlook that.
Right.
Sierra Matkal, that's Israel's elite special forces. Oh, and then you got the loss of his brother, Yonatan. During that hostage rescue mission in Uganda,
Yeah.
76, right?
Yeah.
It really feels like those things, those events, they really shaped his whole view on security and terrorism.
Oh, absolutely. He's, described as hawkish even from a young age. But there's this other interesting layer to it. His father, Benjamin Netanyahu,
Okay.
he was a prominent historian known for his, how do I put it, revisionist views.
Revision. So, like, he's challenging, like, the accepted history?
Exactly. Benzian, he argued for this, like greater Israel.
Oh, you're Israel.
Encompassing territories beyond like the current borders, including the West Bank.
Wow.
Even parts of Jordan. Now, while Benjamin Netanyahu, he hasn't like fully embraced those specific territorial claims, you can definitely see his father's ideology kind of echoing in his political career.
It's so fascinating how, like, a family's intellectual, like, tradition can shape a future leader.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. Speaking of early insights, the video, it digs up this amazing footage from 1978, American television program,
Yeah.
and a young Netanyahu's there,
Really?
but using a pseudonym, Ben Nite.
Wow, I did not know that.
And what's fascinating is this is way before he's officially like a political figure, but he's already arguing passionately against a Palestinian state.
Wow.
He frames it as like an existential threat to Israel. It's almost, I don't know, it's almost prophetic considering his later policies.
Yeah, it's like you can see this like strong, consistent like theme throughout his thinking.
Yeah.
From a very early stage.
So the Oslo Accords, huge turning point, right?
Big time.
For Israeli history. How did Netanyahu, who's like rising in politics at this point, how does he handle that period?
Well, the Oslo Accords, signed in the 90s, aimed for this two-state solution.
Right.
But they also sparked like fierce opposition within Israel.
I can imagine.
And Netanyahu, being the astute politician he is, he kind of capitalized on that wave of dissent, becomes the leader of the Likud party, vehemently opposed to the accords, accused Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin of betraying Israel's security.
Right.
And it's interesting because this opposition to Rabin actually takes a really dark turn in that video.
Oh.
They show footage of this like controversial rally.
Oh, yeah?
And this was just a month before Rabin's assassination.
Wow.
Netanyahu was present at that rally, and you see these protesters, they're depicting Rabin in a Nazi uniform
It's scary.
and chanting, "Death to Rabin."
Really?
Yeah, it's a chilling moment, and a lot of people saw that as contributing to this climate of hatred that ultimately led to Rabin's tragic end.
So, I mean, how does Netanyahu respond to the assassination? Does he soften his stance at all?
Well, this is where it gets kind of complex because as prime minister, he did engage with Yasser Arafat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's even seen shaking his hand at one point. A lot of people saw that as a sign of pragmatism, But while he took part in the negotiations, his approach, it was always cautious. Very minimal concessions. It was like he was walking this tightrope between engaging with the peace process, but also safeguarding his core beliefs.
So he's already becoming the King Bibi that the video kind of portrays. This like shrewd, almost indispensable leader.
Absolutely. And from the late 90s to the early 2000s, he really solidified that image. But then in 2009, there's this seemingly major shift during a speech at Bar Ilan University.
Oh, yeah.
He appears to accept, like, the possibility of a Palestinian state.
Wow. So was that a genuine change or was it just like political maneuvering?
That is the question, and it's still debated today. Some people saw it as a breakthrough, while others, they remained skeptical. They pointed to the strict conditions that he attached to the idea, and, as we'll explore more just a decade later, he completely backtracks on this whole stance.
So, like, the stage is set for this rightward turn in Israeli politics. with Netanyahu at the helm. I'm really curious to hear more about that shift. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, you're right to kind of focus on that rightward shift, because looking back now, that 2009 speech almost feels like, I don't know, like a blip on the radar
Yeah.
compared to what came next. Around 2015, there's this noticeable change in Israeli politics,
Yeah.
and Netanyahu is right at the center of it.
The video really dives into all that, like
Yeah.
his coalition with, more right-wing parties, his rhetoric shifting, and then, of course, the corruption charges.
Exactly, and it's crucial to note, regardless of whether those charges were, valid or not, they definitely played a role
In what way?
in pushing Netanyahu further down this path of consolidating power and, adopting a more, how do you say, combative stance. He very publicly denounced the charges, called it a witch hunt,
Right.
framed himself as a victim of political persecution.
And then during all this, we see his attempts to, overhaul the judiciary,
Right.
giving Parliament more control over judicial appointments. I mean, that raised some serious red flags, right?
Yeah, it did, especially among international observers and even within Israel.
Yeah.
Critics argued it was a blatant attempt to weaken the institutions that were, scrutinizing him,
Right.
potentially undermining checks and balances, things essential for a healthy democracy.
It's like a paradox, battling corruption charges while also trying to reshape the system that's holding him accountable.
And it's during this time, too, that he forms these alliances
Yeah.
with incredibly controversial figures on the far right.
The video mentions Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir.
Exactly, those guys. Known for their extremist views, inflammatory rhetoric, the whole 9 yards.
The video paints a pretty stark picture of them. I mean, Ben-Gvir, he's Minister of National Security now.
Yeah.
But he has a past conviction for inciting racism and terrorism.
And Smotrich has made statements denying the existence of a Palestinian people.
It's like adding them to his government just solidified that whole rightward shift.
For sure, and it deepened concerns about where Israeli society was headed. But amidst all of this, the most intriguing part is how this shift is tied to his relationship with Hamas.
It's interesting, right? Because it challenges that whole good guys versus bad guys narrative.
Completely. If we just label Hamas as terrorist and leave it at that, we miss the nuances, the video highlights.
What nuances?
Some experts, former Israeli intelligence officials even, accuse Netanyahu of purposely making Hamas stronger.
Okay, that seems counterintuitive. Why strengthen a group that, wants to destroy Israel?
The argument is that a stronger Hamas weakens the Palestinian Authority.
The more moderate faction? With Mahmoud Abbas.
Right. It's like a divide-and-conquer strategy.
Yeah.
Prevents a unified Palestinian front, which makes a two-state solution even harder to achieve.
I mean, if you think back to our discussion about Netanyahu's early views and him backtracking on the Palestinian state, it kind of fits a pattern.
It does, doesn't it? The video even mentions a quote from Netanyahu in 2019.
Oh, yeah?
He allegedly said that anyone who wants to prevent a Palestinian state must support strengthening Hamas.
Wow, if that quote is accurate, it really backs up that whole theory. But, I mean, of course, Netanyahu denies it all.
Of course.
Claims any interaction is purely for humanitarian reasons.
Allowing Qatar to send aid money to Gaza.
Which, on the surface, seems reasonable.
Right, but critics argue that this aid, while it's needed, helps Hamas maintain its control.
It's a classic he said, she said. Hard to figure out the truth. But regardless of his intentions, things in Gaza exploded into war in October 2023.
Devastating conflict, terrible consequences.
Yeah.
And this war, it put Netanyahu in the spotlight internationally.
He faced a lot of criticism for how he handled it, right?
Yeah, and the humanitarian crisis.
Plus, the video mentions the International Criminal Court
Oh, right.
issuing an arrest warrant for him,
Yeah.
accusing him of crimes against humanity.
Yeah, not something you see every day, a sitting world leader facing charges like that.
It's a big deal, a reminder of how serious things are. So, I mean, how did he respond to these accusations?
As you might expect, he denied any wrongdoing, claimed it was all politically motivated. The video notes how he compared himself to, Churchill and Roosevelt,
Wow.
framed the Gaza conflict as a necessary fight against terrorism, drew parallels to the Allied struggle against Nazi Germany.
That's a powerful analogy to use.
Very powerful, but it also got a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Many saw it as a way to deflect responsibility, silence legitimate criticism, and even potentially, exploit historical trauma for political gain.
So we're looking at a leader who's increasingly isolated globally, facing war crimes allegations, tangled up in domestic politics, and deeply committed to this right-wing ideology that sees compromise as weakness. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And as we get towards the end of our deep dive here, we need to remember this isn't just about Netanyahu the individual. It's about understanding how his actions, his policies have shaped the whole region. His approach, putting security first above all else, has arguably made peace between Israel and Palestine even more difficult.
It's interesting. The video avoids taking sides, but there's definitely this underlying concern about where Israel's headed under his leadership.
Definitely.
His hardline stance, those far-right alliances, undermining the judiciary. It raises questions about the future of democracy in Israel.
And it's not just an internal issue either. Those same policies have alienated international partners, made finding a peaceful solution even harder.
It makes you think about the human cost of it all for Israelis and Palestinians. Is there any hope for things to get better?
Well, I wouldn't say the video is totally doom and gloom.
Okay.
While it acknowledges how deeply entrenched the conflict is and the challenges, it does point to a glimmer of hope.
What kind of hope?
It highlights people and organizations on both sides working to build bridges, to promote understanding.
Right.
Their efforts might seem small, but they represent a different story, a counter-narrative to the violence and mistrust.
Yeah, a reminder that even in dark times, people are fighting for a better future. But realistically, how do we break through this conflict?
It's clear that sticking with the status quo, what's defined in Netanyahu's leadership, isn't going to work. The video kind of suggests we need a shift in mindset, a move away from zero-sum thinking.
You mean moving past the idea that one side's gain is the other's loss?
Exactly. We need a willingness to have real dialogue, to acknowledge the legitimate grievances on both sides, and to explore creative solutions, ones that might not fit neatly into the current political ideologies.
You're talking about compromise, but that seems tough in a region where fear and trauma run so deep.
It is tough, no doubt. But history shows us that seemingly impossible breakthroughs happen when there's enough courage, compassion, and a real commitment to building a shared future.
That's a powerful thought. This deep dive into Netanyahu's world has been a journey full of complexity, contradictions. It leaves me with the sense of both the weight of history and the possibility of change.
And I hope it's shown how important it is to stay informed, stay engaged, and never give up hope for a more just and peaceful world, even when things seem tough.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu. We encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating subject on your own. It's like we're at this crossroads, right? We've gone through Netanyahu's whole journey, all the political maneuvering, the complexities. He's definitely left his mark on, well, everything. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict especially. But where do we even go from here? What's next?
Yeah, it's the big question, isn't it? The video we talked about, it doesn't really offer any easy answers, but it really pushes you to think about, like, the long-term impacts of his approach, you know?
It's funny because the video tries not to pick sides, but you can feel this, like, undercurrent of worry about the direction Israel's taken under him.
Yeah, for sure.
The hardline stance, the far-right allies, weakening the judiciary. It raises questions about democracy in Israel, its future.
And it's not just an internal thing. Those same policies have, pushed away international partners, made finding a peaceful solution even harder.
It makes you think about the people caught in the middle, Israelis, Palestinians. Is there even a chance for a better future?
Well, I wouldn't say the video is all doom and gloom.
Okay, good.
While it's realistic about the conflict, the challenges, it does point to, like, a glimmer of hope.
What kind of hope? Give me some good news.
It shows those individuals, organizations on both sides working to, build bridges, promoting understanding.
Yeah.
Their efforts might seem small in the grand scheme of things, but they offer a different story, a counter-narrative to the cycle of violence and all that mistrust.
It's good to remember that even when things are really rough, there are people out there trying to make things better. But being practical, how do we actually break through this conflict? What's the solution?
It's clear that just sticking to the same old, what we've seen under Netanyahu, it's not going to work. The video suggests we need, like, a fundamental shift in thinking, moving away from that zero-sum game.
So not thinking that if one side wins, the other automatically loses.
Right. We need to be willing to actually talk, to recognize each other's issues and, come up with creative solutions, maybe ones that don't fit perfectly into the current political boxes.
You're talking about compromise, but that seems almost impossible in a place where fear and trauma are so deeply rooted.
It's hard, no doubt. But history shows us that even when things seem impossible, breakthroughs can happen. If there's enough courage, compassion, and, a real commitment to building a future together.
That's a good point. This whole deep dive into Netanyahu's world, it's been a trip. Complexities, contradictions, everything. I'm left feeling, I don't know, the weight of history, but also this possibility for change.
Yeah, and hopefully it's shown how important it is to stay informed, engaged, and never lose hope for a more just, peaceful world, even when it feels like a long shot.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu. We encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring this fascinating topic on your own. Thanks for tuning in.